Hi friends, in this video I am going to make 48 sentences using one verb. In the same way I am going to use 5 verbs and make 240 sentences. Why 240 sentences? I want you to practice loudly. What happens when you practice loudly? Your vocal cords open and the words will come out freely from your mouth. The next advantage is you are going to learn the correct pronunciation, you are going to learn the neutral accent, and you are also going to gain a lot of confidence to ask and answer the yes or no questions. I wish you all the best. Let's start with the verb rain, R-A-I-N. The sentence is, it rains heavily. It doesn't rain heavily. Does it rain heavily? Doesn't it rain heavily? It rained heavily. It didn't rain heavily. Did it rain heavily? Didn't it rain heavily? It will rain heavily. It won't rain heavily. Will it rain heavily? Won't it rain heavily? It is raining heavily. It isn't raining heavily. Is it raining heavily? Isn't it raining heavily? It was raining heavily. It wasn't raining heavily. Was it raining heavily? Wasn't it raining heavily? It will be raining heavily. It won't be raining heavily. Will it be raining heavily? Won't it be raining heavily? It has rained heavily. It hasn't rained heavily. Has it rained heavily? Hasn't it rained heavily? It had rained heavily. It hadn't rained heavily. Had it rained heavily? Hadn't it rained heavily? It will have rained heavily. It won't have rained heavily. Will it have rained heavily? Won't it have rained heavily? It has been raining heavily. It hasn't been raining heavily. Has it been raining heavily? Hasn't it been raining heavily? It had been raining heavily. It hadn't been raining heavily. Had it been raining heavily? Hadn't it been raining heavily? It will have been raining heavily. It won't have been raining heavily. Will it have been raining heavily? Won't it have been raining heavily? We have made 48 sentences. Now let us go to the next verb. The next verb is receive. Okay. The sentence is Prasad receives checks. Prasad receives check. Prasad doesn't receive checks. Does Prasad receive checks? Doesn't Prasad receive checks? Prasad received checks. Prasad didn't receive checks. Did Prasad receive checks? Didn't Prasad receive checks? Prasad will receive checks. Prasad won't receive checks. Will Prasad receive checks? Won't Prasad receive checks? Prasad is receiving checks. Prasad isn't receiving checks. Is Prasad receiving checks? Isn't Prasad receiving checks? Prasad was receiving checks. Prasad wasn't receiving checks. Was Prasad receiving checks? Wasn't Prasad receiving checks? Prasad will be receiving checks. Prasad won't be receiving checks. Will Prasad be receiving checks? Won't Prasad be receiving checks? Prasad has received checks. Prasad hasn't received checks. Has Prasad received checks? Hasn't Prasad received checks? Prasad had received checks. Prasad hadn't received checks. Had Prasad received checks? Hadn't Prasad received checks? Prasad will have received checks. Prasad won't have received checks. Will Prasad have received checks? Won't Prasad have received checks? Prasad has been receiving checks. Prasad hasn't been receiving checks. Has Prasad been receiving checks? Hasn't Prasad been receiving checks? Prasad had been receiving checks. Prasad hadn't been receiving checks. Had Prasad been receiving checks? Hadn't Prasad been receiving checks? Prasad will have been receiving checks. Prasad won't have been receiving checks. Will Prasad have been receiving checks? Won't Prasad have been receiving checks? Let's go to the third verb. The third verb is reach. The sentence is I reach quickly. I don't reach quickly. Do you reach quickly? Don't you reach quickly? I reached quickly. I didn't reach quickly. Did you reach quickly? Didn't you reach quickly? I will reach quickly. I won't reach quickly. Will you reach quickly? Won't you reach quickly? I am reaching quickly. I aren't reaching quickly. Are you reaching quickly? Aren't you reaching quickly? I was reaching quickly. I wasn't reaching quickly. Were you reaching quickly? Weren't you reaching quickly? I will be reaching quickly. I won't be reaching quickly. Will you be reaching quickly? Won't you be reaching quickly? I have reached quickly. I haven't reached quickly. Have you reached quickly? Haven't you reached quickly? I had reached quickly. I hadn't reached quickly. Had you reached quickly? Hadn't you reached quickly? I will have reached quickly. I won't have reached quickly. Will you have reached quickly? Won't you have reached quickly? I have been reaching quickly. I haven't been reaching quickly. Have you been reaching quickly? Haven't you been reaching quickly? I had been reaching quickly. I hadn't been reaching quickly. Had you been reaching quickly? Hadn't you been reaching quickly? I will have been reaching quickly. I won't have been reaching quickly. Will you have been reaching quickly? Won't you have been reaching quickly? Let's go to the fourth verb. The fourth verb is reject. The sentence is, we reject spoilt items. We reject spoilt items. We don't reject spoilt items. Do you reject spoilt items? Don't you reject spoilt items? We rejected spoilt items. We didn't reject spoilt items. Did you reject spoilt items? Didn't you reject spoilt items? We will reject spoilt items. We won't reject spoilt items. Will you reject spoilt items? Won't you reject spoilt items? We are rejecting spoilt items. We aren't rejecting spoilt items. Are you rejecting spoilt items? Aren't you rejecting spoilt items? We were rejecting spoilt items. We weren't rejecting spoilt items. Were you rejecting spoilt items? Weren't you rejecting spoilt items? We will be rejecting spoilt items. We won't be rejecting spoilt items. Will you be rejecting spoilt items? Won't you be rejecting spoilt items? We have rejected spoilt items. We haven't rejected spoilt items. Have you rejected spoilt items? Haven't you rejected spoilt items? We had rejected spoilt items. We hadn't rejected spoilt items. Had you rejected spoilt items? Hadn't you rejected spoilt items? We will have rejected spoilt items. We won't have rejected spoilt items. Will you have rejected spoilt items? Won't you have rejected spoilt items? We have been rejecting spoilt items. We haven't been rejecting spoilt items. Have you been rejecting spoilt items? Haven't you been rejecting spoilt items? We had been rejecting spoilt items. We hadn't been rejecting spoilt items. Had you been rejecting spoilt items? Hadn't you been rejecting spoilt items? We will have been rejecting spoilt items. We won't have been rejecting spoilt items. Will you have been rejecting spoilt items? Won't you have been rejecting spoilt items? Let's go to the next verb. The next verb is remove. You remove your shoes. You don't remove your shoes. Do I remove my shoes? Don't I remove my shoes? You removed your shoes. You didn't remove your shoes. Did I remove my shoes? Didn't I remove my shoes? You will remove your shoes. You won't remove your shoes. Will I remove my shoes? Won't I remove my shoes? You are removing your shoes. You aren't removing your shoes. Am I removing my shoes? Aren't I removing my shoes? You were removing your shoes. You weren't removing your shoes. Was I removing my shoes? Wasn't I removing my shoes? You will be removing your shoes. You won't be removing your shoes. Will I be removing my shoes? Won't I be removing my shoes? You have removed your shoes. You haven't removed your shoes. Have I removed my shoes? Haven't I removed my shoes? You had removed your shoes. You hadn't removed your shoes. Had I removed my shoes? Hadn't I removed my shoes? You will have removed your shoes. You won't have removed your shoes. Will I have removed my shoes? Won't I have removed my shoes? You have been removing your shoes. You haven't been removing your shoes. Have I been removing my shoes? Haven't I been removing my shoes? You had been removing your shoes. You hadn't been removing your shoes. Had I been removing my shoes? Hadn't I been removing my shoes? You will have been removing your shoes. You won't have been removing your shoes. Will I have been removing my shoes? Won't I have been removing my shoes? Friends, I have covered 240 sentences. I want you to put your headphone, listen to it and repeat after me loudly as possible. If you're in the internet, you may need cafe, you may not be able to do that, but you can download it to your mobile and you can start practicing. If you have a PC at home, you can do that, and have an internet connection, you can do that. I want you to just keep practicing speaking loudly. What happens? You know. You are going to get a lot of practice, and once you get a lot of practice, you are going to speak English fluently. I wish you all the best. In my next video, I'm going to add 5 more verbs, and I'm going to make 240 sentences using one verb. I will make 48 sentences. I wish you all the best. Friends, you may subscribe to my channel in YouTube. To subscribe, please press here. Follow me on Twitter by clicking here. Want to follow me on Facebook? Click here to like my page.